Okay, ladies and gentlemen, members of the convention, but equally members of our global community that are tuning into this session of the convention, I want to briefly describe what's going to happen over the next 50 minutes or so. We're going to have brief introductions from 7 countries, from Ronald MacDonald in Sydney, from David Dempsey in Munich, from Paul Lynch in Paris, from John Murphy in New York, from Susan Cahill in Montreal.
I don't mind if Tom does that.
Sorry? And from Mary Hickman and Ryan Feeney, who are here on stage with us. And in each of these cases, the panelists will have 3 or 4 minutes, and they'll have that. We're going to have to be quite precise about that to make their point, to reflect the viewpoint of the countries in which they are based, and particularly the comments that the people citizens in those countries who filled in the online questionnaire, to reflect what those are saying in the questionnaire. We're then going to invite some questions from the floor, and those questions will have to be posed up here on the stage, so people will have to come up if they want to pose a question. There'll be a limited amount of time for that, and then we will go back to the people in the different cities in a specific order, because that's the way this whole thing has had to be set out and agreed. So that's the way we're going to run it, and I'm delighted now to invite Ronan MacDonald from Sydney to contribute.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It's 8 p.m. in the evening here in Sydney after a very hot spring day, so I'm delighted to be joining you and participating in this important convention. I think that it's wonderful that the convention is a real embodiment of participative democracy insofar as there are so many ordinary citizens involved. But I note, if I just might preface my remarks about Australia, that there are no immigrants or members of the diaspora on the convention itself, and I think that is significant in terms of the structure of the deliberations that are going on about votes for immigrants. It's also, I think, significant that in the day and a half that that's been devoted to discussing this, we only have 50 minutes for this participation of those who it affects in an Other Voices section called Other Voices. So I think this is worthy of note as well. I think that in terms of, I want to offer a few thoughts on how the survey has been responded to in Australia, and just I suppose I'm a cipher therefore for Australian views, but also perhaps offer a few comments and anecdotal evidence of my own in terms of my experience living here. The Australian survey broadly accords with the global one in terms of its favouring of votes for immigrants in the presidential elections, but it is stronger in so doing. A strong majority agree that immigrants should be allowed to vote, 92% in Australia as opposed to 86% globally. Now this may be because more have lived in Ireland and more respondents have left since 2010. That's 34.52% as opposed to 24.5%. The survey, as you know, has been quite controversial in terms of some of the questions asked, and some of the questions have been viewed by people, representatives to the convention, as being something of a push-poll and quite leading. One of the questions, question 8, if people are not paying for services through taxation, they should not have a right to dictate the extent to which those who do should pay. There was a more emphatic disagreement with that question in Australia, asking if 65.27% as opposed to 50.79% in the global survey. And now I know the remit of the convention is to discuss presidential elections, but in reporting views from Australia, I have to say that there's a widespread feeling that the discussion should be broader, and that we should also be considering extending some voting rights to Irish citizens living abroad for Dáil elections or parliamentary elections, and indeed for referenda as well. I have encountered a certain degree of cynicism that this is simply the presidential election, which is seen as symbolic rather than a more meaningful enfranchisement. Certainly, and I think I reflect some of your earlier speakers, my experience has been that there's a great interest in Ireland from those living in Australia. It's not hard to keep abreast of affairs in Ireland with the internet and Skype, and many people are passionate and informed about it. And as we've seen, I think, in Pierce McHenry's presentation. There's also a sense, and I think this probably particularly pertains to Australia, that people have come here due to political and economic decisions. And a lot of people here in Australia are here for limited duration. Therefore, I think their presence here is more precarious. So, I mean, recently in Australia there was a general election in which we saw Australian people in Ireland voting. Irish people saw that. And I think amongst people I know, people I've discussed, particularly recent arrivals, of whom there is many, there was a real feeling that Irish people here should have the same rights. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ronan, and thank you very much for sticking to your time. Could I call in David Dempsey from Munich, please? Very good. David, can you...
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, yes.
Okay. First of all, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the opportunity to present the views of the Irish people living in Germany. I'm calling in from Munich, so about 100 metres away from me, 1 million people are busy having a party while we're sitting here at the Oktoberfest. I can only reflect a lot of the comments that Ronan made. Anyone I spoke to, or most people I spoke to, felt that the survey was quite directed and the questions were set up in a certain way that only a limited viewpoint could be given. The issue, a major issue as an Irish person living in Europe, is that we're effectively disenfranchised in that we cannot vote in a German election, we cannot vote in an Irish election, and so as a European paying taxes in Europe, we effectively have no vote anywhere. So, and that was not covered as a part of the overall survey. So the survey was limited primarily to a theoretical right to vote and also a right to vote for the president. And we felt that Ireland has an obligation to its citizens to enable us to vote in an election somewhere, particularly in Europe, as a European citizen. I'll address some of the individual points. Overall, most people in Germany came here in the 80s and in the last 10 years. So that reflects the need to emigrate due to economic conditions and not a choice, wasn't a choice for emigration. Having said that, living in Germany, you're within 2 hours of Ireland, and it's probably quicker to get back to Dublin for me than to get to Cork or Kerry from Dublin. And so the question whether Irish people living here are not in touch with Irish society is in principle not very relevant given the internet, Skype, and all the communication forms we have at the moment. Regarding the point of taxation, if people who were not able to pay tax, were not paying tax, were not able to vote, that would disenfranchise, I believe, almost half of the Irish population living in Ireland. So that question was found to be not particularly relevant. So I would say in every case, almost without exception, 70 to 90% of people who answered the survey answered in a positive manner in terms of we would like the right to vote, we would like the right to vote for a president, we would like the right to have our feelings heard, and we feel that we're as aware of what's going on as people in Ireland. If I have a personal perspective, if I had a choice, I would prefer to vote in Germany, but given I can't vote in Germany, I would prefer that my vote as a European is heard somewhere. In every case, I think we had over 90% of people here felt a strong loyalty to Ireland. And so the feedback we're giving is as people who see ourselves as Irish people living abroad, but who are very connected to our homeland and our culture, and who would actively like to support the country. So overall, it's a positive vote in terms of we want to be seen and as Irish and given a consideration as part of the Irish community. And yes, we would like to have a vote, but we would also make a strong request that the Irish government speak at a European level and enable us to have a vote in our local home of residence as well. Thank you.
David, thank you very much indeed. Could I call on Paul Lynch in Paris? Paul, off you go.
Good afternoon from Paris. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon from Paris. The topic of the right to vote has been the subject of many conversations amongst the Irish in France for a considerable amount of time. The granting of voting rights in presidential elections would be a huge step forward and could lead perhaps to eventual granting of limited rights to voting in referenda and general elections. France is the home of many Irish citizens, either long or short term. Irish citizens in France may vote in local or European elections, but as the dynamics of politics in France differs considerably from Ireland, many people generally don't get too involved. In fact, the only time Irish people feel enfranchised in France is when they get to vote by SMS for Ireland in the Eurovision Song Contest. In this very embassy here in Paris, a number of years ago, the question of the right to vote was put to a prominent Irish government minister. The standard reply, which I'm sure many immigrants have heard in the past, was, "Do you pay tax in Ireland?" The person in question actually had a house in Ireland which was rented, and he did in fact pay income tax on the rental income. So although he was living in France, he was in fact paying income tax in Ireland, but still he had no vote. The minister in question told him he would get back to him on the subject. So 7 years later, he's still waiting. This is probably a situation which some Irish citizens abroad find themselves in, and perhaps should be part of your deliberations. With a considerable amount of Irish passports in the world, we here in France recognise that there would need to be a cut-off point with regard to who can and cannot vote. For presidential elections, for example, we suggest that any Irish passport holder of voting age born on the island of Ireland should have a vote, or any Irish passport holder of voting age who has exercised their right to vote in any election or referendum in the Republic of Ireland. The second condition would be to take into consideration the many Irish who were born, for example, in the United Kingdom, to Irish parents who emigrated in the 1950s, but returned to Ireland with their children when the economy in Ireland had improved. We recognise the issue of emigrants voting in general elections and referenda is a complex one. We are hopeful there will be a convention in the future to discuss this subject, but in the interim, however, we feel that any person who has emigrated from the Republic of Ireland should be allowed to vote in general elections and referenda for a specified period, for example 5 years, in the constituency in which they resided before emigration. To enable as many immigrants to participate, this voting would be performed electronically. An administration fee should be applied to ensure this procedure is not a burden on the Irish taxpayer. On behalf of the Irish people in France, I would like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving us this opportunity to express our opinions on this subject. Thank you very much.
Paul, thanks very much again, and thanks for being so precise in your timing. Could I call on John Murphy in New York? And John, thanks for getting up so early.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, fellow Irish men and women around the world and back home. And Tom, my pleasure and honour. Tom, I was originally asked to do this and I was told I would be in the comfort of my pyjamas from my home in Jersey as it is about 5 a.m. But alas, I'm here in Midtown, dressed up for you guys, and after a few pots of coffee, I think I'm ready to go. It's an honour and a privilege to carry this message to you all on behalf of your fellow citizens over here in the States. My name is John Murphy. I'm co-chair of the Irish Network around the States, a 15 chapter membership growing around the States, president of the Irish American Bar Association, and president of the Manhattan Gales. I'm a husband, father, a proud son of Ireland and a proud son of Wexford, and somebody who's been active in the Irish and Irish American community over here for my 20 years in an effort to give back, like so many of us around the world do, and demonstrate our love and connectedness for our homeland by giving back in the form of helping people who come over here to get set up, and in fact in the form of directing business back home. It's an honour and a privilege, as I said, to be here with you. Let me first quickly go through the poll results. And as others have said, there's a remarkable consistency between the results from around the globe in terms of the strength of the percentages in favour of establishing this connectedness, giving citizens around the world the right to vote. Really, across the board, the number is pretty much 90% over here in the States. 90% obviously are in favour of voting on the basis of citizenship versus residency. 90% basically are in favour of the voting in the presidency, and unless I'm reading it wrong, it's basically 90% or thereabouts in favour of voting in actual Dáil elections as well, echoing some of my compatriots in Paris and Sydney, that the strength of ambition here to be connected and be participating goes beyond just the symbolic presidential race, but even further. But again, I think what's important here, and what I applaud you, Tom, and everybody assembled there, is for taking this issue up. For so long, it's been left hanging out there, and like somebody said, I think in Paris, there was answers that would go unanswered for 7 odd years on some of these issues, and for a lot longer, because people over here and around the world, make no mistake, it's been a yearning of a lot of people for a long time to have this issue brought out. So I commend and applaud you for that. You know, on my own, again, just my own thoughts quickly, I found myself driving in here this morning through the Lincoln Tunnel and across the skyscrapers that are in New York City, and wondering what would people who've come before, powerful people through this city, be it Waterford's Tom Maher, who led the fighting 69th in the Civil War, you know, the last mayor of this city who hailed from Mayo, Bill O'Dwyer, back in the 60s, you know, maybe Annie Moore herself, who was the first person through Ellis Island, and all those people who came after her. What would they say if given this opportunity? I think what they'd say to you is, first and foremost, grab this. Take this opportunity to turn the perspective around and to say that this is an Ireland whose people have had to leave for many reasons down the years, some out of economic necessity, some out of ambition, but they've left and they've never lost and never will lose that love and connectedness for their homeland. They want to give back, they want to be connected. And more, and this is what's important in today's age, in the times we're in, you guys are coming to us and need that diaspora involvement in the form of economic investment and dollars and cents and tourism and otherwise. This is a powerful opportunity for you guys to say, you know what? We not only value your economic connectedness and participation, but we value you so much and we hear you so much that we're extending the branch of democratic participation fully and connectedly to us.
John, thank
we
you.
We want you to be part of this. I'm sorry, Tom. Yeah. I'll end there. Sorry, okay. Forgive me. But again, thank you all. Take this opportunity. It's a very positive step, and on behalf of all of your fellow citizens in New York and around the States, thank you very much for taking this up.
Thanks, John, indeed. And we will be back to all of you, in fact, later on in this session. Could I now invite Susan Cahill from Montreal to come in, please?
Thank you for the opportunity to represent the Irish immigrants in Canada. I'm a professor in the School of Canadian Irish Studies in Concordia University in Montreal. And the results of the Canadian survey seem completely in keeping with my knowledge of the Irish diaspora here. The major periods of immigration to Canada are in the 50s and the 80s, and then again from 2000. And then there's a radical increase in the last 3 years, which also corresponds to my arrival to Canada in 2011. And again, echoing many of the comments that have been made, the results show that Irish immigrants in Canada are strongly in favour of being allowed to vote in presidential elections and on basic principles of the state as set out in the Constitution. Given Canada's large land masses, it can be difficult to make generalisations about the Irish community here, which can be quite dispersed. The majority of Irish immigrants are going to Toronto and Vancouver, and increasingly recently they're going to Saskatoon and Alberta. There's been quite active recruitment on the part of the Canadian government for skilled tradespeople and construction workers. And broadly speaking, the immigrant community can be divided in generational terms. People who are long established in Canada, who might have come over in the 50s and 80s, and then secondly, a recent influx of new arrivals. The older generation of immigrants emigrated primarily in the 50s and 80s, as I said, who are well established in Canada, may have an emotional connection to Ireland, but that's a generalisation and therefore problematic. And given the particularities of immigration patterns, then may not have visited Ireland as much. They may be perceived as less informed voters, but given access to online media, I think that's also a questionable assumption. Then my experience of the younger generation of immigrants is in accordance with the findings of the UCC Emigrate project. It's a more mobile one, digitally and immediately engaged with Ireland through social media, online media, and due to cheaper travel, there's a regular in which immigrants feel like they have the possibility to return. Thank you.
Again, thank you very much, Susan, and again, thank you for your very succinct and clear presentation. We're now going to Mary Hickman, who is here on stage with us. Mary, we saw you before last May. We're delighted to see you again.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the re-invitation. We were asked to comment on the survey carried out on behalf of the convention, and despite agreeing with some of the criticisms made by some of the other participants, I think it is interesting to notice that despite some heavily directed questions, but nonetheless, over 80% of those surveyed in Britain and globally just took it as read that voting powers are linked to citizenship, and over 85% in Britain and globally thought they should have the vote for the president. The other striking thing I thought about the survey, if you look at it, is that 80% of the respondents had left since 1980, and over half of them since 2000. The votes issue is really very strong for current immigrants. I think for older immigrants, and I could say in Britain, they may be less likely to be online, less likely maybe to have heard of the issue being discussed or the availability of access to the Constitutional Convention. Nonetheless, I think the elderly Irish in Britain would very much welcome the vote for the presidency. And do remember that probably nearly half or 40% of the Irish born outside of Ireland do live in Britain, Scotland and England, in Britain. At the last census, it was 430,000 people living there who were born in the Republic of Ireland, for example. And then, of course, you would add in people born in Northern Ireland. But the point is really that when you look at the UCC survey that Pyrrhus presented earlier, 80% of immigrants said they thought they should be able to vote in general elections. And perhaps what was most valuable about their survey is that it included households in Ireland. And of them, 2/3 thought that immigrants ought to have the vote in general elections, and 79% thought that they should be able to vote for the president. If I could just interject a personal note, if you recommended this weekend that the government think of having a referendum on Irish citizens abroad being able to vote for the president, and that was eventually passed, I would be able to vote for the Irish president because I've got dual citizenship between Britain and Ireland. And I would happily exercise that privilege if given it to me. But it isn't right that someone like me be able to vote for the Dáil in general elections. But I think that is an absolute right that emigrant citizens abroad, people who were born in Ireland who have left, should have the right. In the 1990s, I lived in the United States. And in 1997, there was a terribly key election in Britain. It was when 18 years of Conservative government ended and New Labour, whatever one thinks of it now, came in. And it would have appalled me if I hadn't been able to vote from the United States in that election because I was resident there at the time. And I had the option of a paper vote or proxy. I chose proxy. So I just want to really, I wanted to give that person an example to show that it really does matter. And I want to end by saying, I know your main business this weekend is votes for Irish citizens abroad for the president. And I really hope you recommend a referendum on that subject to the government. But I also understand you can vary your agenda. And I really urge you to consider, losing my nose, I really urge you to consider either recommending in some way that the issue of emigrant citizens abroad being able to vote in general elections is taken forward, or, if you need further time to consider it, that you deal with it under your own AOB business in the extended constitutional agenda. I mean, the real key thing is this issue about emigrant citizens voting in general elections isn't going to go away. and it's the avenue, the gateway to a far better balanced relationship between the Irish nation and its diaspora.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much indeed. Could I finally then, for this round of interventions, invite Ryan Feeney to give a Northern Ireland perspective?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and can I say from the outset that it's a great privilege and honour to address this august body today. I've been following the work of the Constitutional Convention, and I think you've served us very well thus far in your deliberations. I'm an Irish citizen. I hold no other identity or no dual nationality. I am an Irish citizen. I'm resident in the North. I'm a tax-paying and hopefully law-abiding citizen within that state, and I've accepted that as part of the compromise within the Good Friday Agreement. However, as an Irish citizen, I play no role in this state other than holding an Irish passport. I chaired the One Voice, One Vote campaign, which was established in 2011 to lobby for two things. One, the right to nominate, and two, the right to vote in presidential elections. And we completely agree that diaspora across the world should also be given those two rights as well. We collected thousands of signatures, and we had supporters from right across the political spectrum, but we were non-party political. And we also had support from the moderate unionist community as well in terms of how we did our business. The campaign that we held was an important one. Such importance that I got a text message from Joe Brawley this morning telling me not to screw up being here today. So I take that on board very, very importantly. But in 1998, I cast my first ballot, my first ever vote for the Good Friday Agreement, and I'm a massive proponent of that agreement, and I voted yes. The Good Friday Agreement clearly states that it's the birthright of all the people of Northern Ireland to identify themselves and be accepted as either British, Irish, or both, as they so choose. The amended Article 2 of the Constitution states it is the entitlement and birthright of every person born on the island of Ireland, which includes its islands and seas, to be part of the Irish nation. What we are asking in one voice, one vote is the opportunity to be part of that nation by being allowed to elect the head of the nation. I want to make it very clear, this is not about flag flying and this is not about partition. Part of the Good Friday Agreement makes it very clear that my Irish identity is based on the prelude that I protect and defend those on this island and those in the northern jurisdiction who are British. And I myself have been involved in good relations work all my adult life, and I would never do anything to be divisive or ever do anything to damage cross-community relations. This is a personal choice for me, and it's about my personal identity. The electorate of Ireland has served us well, very well, with the past presidents that we've had. But irony is such that we had a president, probably one of the greatest in the state, who couldn't vote for herself in the first presidential election. And I talk, of course, of Professor Mary McAleese. In fact, the irony is her and her husband never got the opportunity to vote for herself when she became resident in Dublin. There was no second election. We also had a range of people that sat in the Council of State: Harvey Bicker, Dennis Maloney, Deirdre Heenan, Sally Marini, Quentin Oliver and Noel Stewart, none of which had a vote in the presidential elections, but all of which advised the President on the Constitution. It's very, very clear to say that we all have an opportunity here today, and you have a very, very important role this weekend. The diaspora and the people of the North and Irish people right across the world have the opportunity to be united by electing the head of the Irish nation. And we would argue very strongly the Constitution outlines the head of state and the head of nation are not the state and the nation are not coterminous, but the head of state are. So to conclude, I'll just misquote George Bernard Shaw and say that some people look at things that are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not. I can't understand any reason why we wouldn't agree to move forward on this today in terms of referenda. And finally, members of the Constitutional Convention, global presidential voting rights for Irish citizens is an idea whose time has come. I ask you to consider that very carefully over the next 48 hours. Go raibh míle maith.
Thank you very much indeed, Ryan. We've actually got through all those interventions from around the world, and we're spot on time at the moment. We have a short few moments now where I can invite some comments or questions from the audience. If anyone wants to ask a question, please so indicate, and if you do so, you need to come up here to the podium. Is there a volunteer? I thought I'd be knocked over with the rush, but this is really amazing. Nobody wants to speak. First time in the history of the convention. James Bannon, up to the podium. No, you're not okay. You have to come up here. And again, I would ask anyone who's getting up here, we've very little time, so I want to make your point clearly and succinctly.
It's nice to be first for a change. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. First, I was very interested in the presentations from across the world. Indeed, it's about catching up with the rights of our immigrants abroad. And I believe that, for a long time we have been patronising, politicians have been patronising over the years. They have visited places like New York on St. Patrick's Day and talked about what they were going to do. The time now is for action. And I believe, as Mr. Murphy said, the duties of citizenship is not alone to vote in token presidential elections, but we should be extended that right to our immigrants to vote in parliamentary elections as well. That's my personal view, and I want to say I'll be voting for the rights of people abroad to have to exercise their franchise at every single election. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Next. Alan, would you just introduce yourself quickly?
Hi, I'm Alan Green. I just have a question, I suppose, to our representatives from the diaspora. One of the questions on the survey, question number 13, as a resident of your given country, I feel my primary loyalty is to that country. I see that globally, about 75% or so disagreed with that statement. And I just want to pick up on a comment that was made by one of our contributors, saying that residents in some of these countries are disenfranchised at the moment. They can't vote here in Ireland, and they can't vote in the country where they're currently resident. Now, David Dempsey, I believe, currently in Munich, stated that he would prefer to vote in Germany, because that's the country where he's resident. But given the fact that he can't vote in Germany, would like the opportunity to vote somewhere. I'm just wondering, is there anyone who'd like to comment on that? Anyone from the diaspora who'd like to comment further on that? Is there a general feeling among the citizens abroad?
Okay. We will be going back
to
we'll specifically ask David that, but other people in other places may wish to comment as well. Thanks, Alan. Any last comment? Yeah, okay. Tom, up to the podium, quickly. Yeah.
Sorry, Tom. I'd just like to ask our contributors from around the world, some of them mentioned that it's symbolic what we're doing here today, and Deputy Bannon talked about having a vote in parliamentary elections, and what's their view on that, because I'd hate them to feel that all we're doing here today is giving them a tokenistic role in expressing their rights as citizens to vote, and I'd just like to hear their views on what more we should be doing for them in relation to giving them, I suppose, full expression of their citizenship. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. We're going to have two more. Tom Burke first.
Thanks, Chairman. I'd like to thank Dr. Hickman for some statistics she was able to give me on Irish born abroad. For Britain, Australia and USA, we have a actual total of 626,798 and estimated worldwide 1.2 million. I think given the vote for the presidency alone is tokenism, and I'm totally against it. If we're to consider anything, consider giving the vote. But bear in mind, in considering giving the vote for all elections, that the potential electorate is greater than the number of votes cast in the last election. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ivana, you've got the last word, and you could make it succinct.
Thank you. Very briefly, Ivana Bacik, and Chris said he was quite emotional hearing the statistics earlier. I found those presentations from cities and countries around the world, from Irish people abroad, very emotional too, and thank you for those. Just a very brief and practical question, which is, there's a clear, overwhelming support for extending votes to Irish citizens abroad in presidential elections, and it seems also support for extending into votes abroad in Dáil or parliamentary elections. Should there be time limits on those votes, and should they be different if we're extending in presidential elections compared to extending in Dáil elections, given what Tom and others have pointed out about practical considerations in terms of geographic constituencies? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ivana. I think we will certainly be teasing out some of those issues later on in the day, but we're going to go back now, do another tour, if you like, tour of the world. So, Ronan in Sydney, would you like to respond to basically any of the questions or any of the comments that you've heard since this transmission began?
Well, I feel very encouraged. Especially, I expected my fellow immigrants to say what they said in support of this proposal. I'm encouraged that we have moved beyond the remit of the presidential voting in the presidency to a more solid enfranchisement in which immigrants would have voting rights in Dáil elections and referenda as well. I think that we hear an awful lot about diaspora and engaging the diaspora and how doing so will help us overcome the current economic difficulties in Ireland. It's hard to square that assertion that has been made repeatedly by government ministers in Ireland since the crisis, with the idea that Irish people or Irish immigrants don't pay taxes and don't invest enough in the country. Either the diaspora is a solution to the current problems and therefore are involved in giving back in some way, are stakeholders which can benefit Ireland, or they're not. And if they are, there should certainly be a two-way engagement. I'm very encouraged that the speakers have agreed with that. I also think that voices of immigrants need to be heard more. I think a lot of people pronounce on immigration who haven't experienced it. That's why we get these stereotypes about it sometimes, such as question 11. Do immigrants have a misty-eyed view of Ireland? I don't think it's the case. Whatever about third or fourth generation Irish people abroad, immigrants, expats, certainly don't. They're very much engaged and want to be part of the nation, even if they're not resident in the state.
Ronan, thanks very much. Could we go to David? David in Munich, please.
Yes, I'd like to pick up on the point that Tom Burke made. I'm fully aware with the number of people holding Irish passports abroad that it's very difficult, particularly for Dáil elections, to allocate votes to people. And I think the idea some of the people mentioned regarding time limits or differentiating between people with a passport and people who have lived recently or at some stage in their life in Ireland or were born there also makes sense. So it's not that we're not aware that this is not a highly complex issue. It's simply that at the moment, not being able to vote, not being able to have an impact means that you're outside the community and so can't really make your voice heard or have an impact. And as my colleague in New York said, we've been asked here as part of the Global Irish to contribute heavily and to support the Irish community in helping in getting over this current difficult period. And on the one hand being asked, while on the other hand not being given the same rights and expectations that people living in Ireland have, it's a bit harsh, and I'd like to find some solution which moves towards us.
David, Alan Green specifically posed a question to you. What's your response to it?
It was particularly frustrating last week when Germany went to the polls to select between the current government and a new government. And being asked to pay taxes in Germany and equally in Ireland, where I have property, means that I have the right to pay taxation, but I don't have the right to vote. And that caused a civil war in America. And I think people have always been frustrated when they haven't been able to have their voice heard.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, David. Paul in Paris.
Yeah, just referring back to my presentation about the voting in general elections and referenda is a complex issue. But perhaps it might be an idea for the government to consider setting up an actual ministry for the diaspora. So in other words, have the minister for the diaspora, and maybe then within this ministry, maybe split the diaspora into three zones: the Americas, North and South America, Europe and Africa, and then Asia and Australasia. And then the people in the diaspora would be entitled to vote for this particular ministry. And it's just because of the complexity of North and South Ireland, obviously there's always going to be issues when it comes to general elections in the Republic of Ireland. So maybe this might be another solution where having a new ministry.
Okay, Paul, thank you very much. John, New York.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, again, to echo everyone, I'm really heartened by the response by the folks who got up in reaction to what we've had to share. I think frankly, it's awesome that you're potentially going beyond just this narrow remit of the presidential participation. I think you get it. I think what's powerful about this exercise is that this is ground up democratic participation. You guys feel it. It's your brothers and sisters, it's your aunts and uncles who are over there in Australia, the States and Europe who do feel disenfranchised, who want to stay connected. So I really think it's brilliant that you're actually potentially going to take on the discussion going broader and reach out and make the connectedness even stronger. Just to respond to a couple of the specific things that came up, the measure of loyalty one is an interesting graph, and the fact that the vast majority put primary loyalty to Ireland. I don't think it means they're disloyal to where they are. I just think it's, again, emblematic of what we've been saying, that everybody's strength and connectedness and love for their homeland is so strong that they would, of course, put that as their primary. It doesn't mean that where they are, they aren't full participation and very involved either. On the issue of how this is all going to work, the numbers, Tom Burke, I think that is a powerful issue. And if I'm sitting in your shoes, it's also part of your responsibility to say, well, how is it going to work? Are you going to have 1.2 million coming in and telling me how often my roads are going to be paved and how often local signs are going to be put up? I really don't think there are models in place. I think Paul and Paris said, the French have a model. You have a representative from a region such that people have a voice. People over here and around the world, we don't want to tell you guys when we're not there how often your roads are paved. It's about having a voice on some of the bigger issues. And when you have a regional representation, the models exist that this can be done by and looked at. I think, again, it's powerful that you guys are feeling it and willing to take up the broader and deeper issue. I commend you for it. And as Ronan said in Sydney, we're going to continue to be here for continued engagement and participation, and anything we can do to further this will be available for you. So thanks again.
Thanks very much, John. Susan in Montreal.
So I'd like to go back to the issue of loyalty again, which is much more complex than just do you have loyalty to the country that you're resident in or the country that you're from. And I think it's to do with the idea of being a stakeholder and whether your interests are bound up in the future of the state, whether you've got a lifelong connection to that state, and that can be multiple, that you can feel a stakeholder in your country of origin and the country that you're currently resident in. But given the current disenfranchisement, I think particularly younger immigrants, they don't have a voice either in their country of residence or in Ireland. So it's much more complex, and that you can hold allegiances and you have a stake in multiple states and multiple places. Again, I think John's point that there's existing models for the way in which this work is a pertinent one. That there's more of an argument for a limited time for voting in something like a Dáil election rather than the bigger issues of the presidential election and a referendum, which I think that most people with an Irish passport who've born in Ireland feel like they should have a voice in.
Susan, thank you very much. Mary, go back to yourself.
Thank you. I want to respond to three of the questions. The gentleman who brought up the issue that 75% of the survey respondents didn't say said their primary loyalty wasn't to the country of residence, and he wondered if this would change if they had the vote in the parliamentary elections of the country they're resident in. I suppose I just want to remind the convention that in Britain, the Irish who live in Britain, the people who've left Ireland and are Irish-born, can vote. And the same proportion of them answered in the survey, both this survey and the UCC one, saying they wanted the votes in the Dáil. One of the reasons is, on emigrating to Britain, they realised the democratic deficit in their relationship to Ireland compared with British citizens living in Ireland and their relationship to Britain. Because any British citizen, for the first 15 years that they live in Ireland, can vote for the Dáil and for Westminster. And many of them think, why can't we have the same rights? To the question Tom brought up about statistics, which I did, the VICA submission does give what we consider the best estimates on the Irish born abroad, and that includes the census results recently in Australia, the US and the UK. But his real point was that the numbers are very large compared with the Irish electorate. I think the Irish electorate at your last general election was just over 3 million, and we estimate 1 to maximum 1.2 million Irish-born citizens abroad. So But however, as a number of other people have said, that proportion, which is high, a third, could be dealt with by reserve constituencies and having direct representatives for the diaspora in the Dáil if you were discussing general elections. And finally, the question about time limits. The VICA campaign, Votes for Irish Citizens Abroad, doesn't recommend time limits because of the, in fact, 127 countries, not 115 around the world that give votes for their citizens abroad. Only a minority have a time limit. The UK is in that small minority. But should you consider and think a time limit is reasonable, I would urge you to mirror more something like the UK's, which allows an emigrant to perhaps vote in 3 elections after they leave, rather than, say, Australia's, which I think is about 3 years. Yeah. So that's my answer.
Thank you very much. And Ryan, you have the last word.
Yeah, well, firstly to say, in terms of loyalty, I think that all of us who've had the opportunity to travel throughout the world and meet our fellow diaspora and those fellow Irish men and women out there would know that we're very clannish and we still stick together. And I've never went anywhere that I haven't saw people be loyal to Ireland, no matter where they're living. I think that where we're coming from at the moment is that we want all the people of the island having the opportunity to vote, and all Irish citizens across the world, without time limits. As long as they have Irish citizenship, whether that be dual or otherwise, they should be given the opportunity to vote in presidential elections. And I take the point from Mary as well in terms of reserved referenda. This is not about people from the north or people from across the world interfering in issues regarding regional development or issues regarding health or education. Those are things that can be discussed and sorted out within the state and within the political framework that is here. But I do think in terms of the nationhood and in terms of the issues that affect the Constitution, that certainly the members of the Irish nation who live in the north and those who live throughout the world should be given a voice in that, because the Constitution does affect our lives in many different respects. So again, I would argue that this is an opportunity to galvanise the Irish nation across the world. And the argument has been made earlier in terms of economics, in terms of our outreach, in terms of how we are seen internationally. I think this is a fantastic opportunity.
Ryan, thank you very much. And I want to thank everybody who participated and from these various countries. It's been, I think, a powerful, a unique and an emotional 50 minutes. And there's a number of people that really have to be thanked for making this happen, because this, as you can imagine, was not a simple thing to organise. I want to firstly say thanks to the Department of Foreign Affairs. Their embassies throughout the world and at headquarters here have been extremely good in collaborating on this project generally, and specific thanks to Noel Gallagher and Frank Gibbons. Pi Communications have done a fantastic job, specifically thanks to Connor, Ciara and the team. The sound, Jerry, and the Grand Hotel here, and Matt Ryan and his team have done a fantastic job. So thank you for your attention and for your, in listening to this debate. Thank you to all the presentations, and thank you to everybody who made it happen. We're going to, I mean, this has been a very powerful morning, I think, between the earlier presentations, this last session we've had. So you're going to be able to catch your breath now and sit around and discuss these matters for about 50 minutes until lunchtime. So facilitators are at the ready, so I invite you to commence.